All right, so here we have a 3 by 3 systems of equations. We're going to solve it using a matrix. So the first step we're going to do is create a matrix using the coefficients. So I'm going to have 1, -1, 1, and 8. This is row 1. Row 2 is 2, 3, -1, and -2. And row 3 is 3, -2, -9, and 9. Now, what we want to do is our first step is to turn this first spot into a 1, which we have. So there's no work to do that. So the next step, what we're going to do is we need to go ahead and turn this. And then we also want to turn this 3 into the 0. So how we're going to do that is by taking and looking as going through and looking at this. So the idea and the reason why we make that first piece 1, row 1, column 1, the one I have circled in blue, is because we're going to use this idea to go ahead and make everything underneath that equal to 0. So I'm going to go ahead and take -2 times row 1 and add that to row 2. When I get this, I will go ahead and replace this with row 2. So -2 times row 1 gives us -2, 2, -2, and -16. I use the existing row 2, which is 2, 3, -1, and -2. When I add those two pieces together, I go ahead and get 0, 5, -3, -18. I'm going to replace what I had with row 2, and this will now be my new row 2. Now, the next step is to replace that 3 with a 0, the one that I have in purple. And the way that I'm going to go ahead and do that is I'm going to take that and make that -3 times row 1 plus row 3. If I multiply -3 times row 1, I get -3 plus 3 minus 3 minus 24. I add that to the existing row 3, which is 3, -2, -9, and 9. When I do all of that, that goes ahead and gives me 0, 1, -12, and -15. Now let's go ahead and take a look at the big picture. What's going on right here? So everything that I have that I just did here, this is going to become my new row 3. So my new matrix, I keep row 1 the same. Row 1 is 1, -1, 1, and 8. This piece here becomes my new row 2. So my new row 2 is 0, 5, -3, -18. And my new row 3 is 0, 1, -12, and -15. All right, I'm going to go ahead and put this on a new slide. All right, so for this stage, what I want to do is turn this first piece here into a 1, and then above it and below it need to turn into a 0. However, if I look at this, if I look at row row 2 and row 3. I see that in row 3, they already have a 1 where I want it. So I'm just going to go ahead and swap those around and interchange row 2 with row 3. That gives me, the first row doesn't change. Row 2 is now 0, 1, negative 12, negative 15. And now row 3 is 0, 5, negative 3, and negative 18. So now that this piece here is a 1, I need to use that, and now I need to change this negative 1 into a 0 is my first goal. And then I'm going to turn that number below it also into. So to go ahead and turn that row 1 spot into a 0, what I'm going to do to be able to get that and achieve that is I'm going to take and add row 1 plus row 2. To turn the negative 5 into a 0, what I'm going to go ahead and do with that is it's negative 5 times row 2 plus row 3. So row 1 is just 1, negative 1, 1, and 8. Row 2 is 0, 1, negative 12, and 15. Adding those two together gives me a 1, 0, negative 11, and negative 7. Now notice, the reason I have to wait until this is a 0 to do that, if I had any other number other than 0, this 1 would change. So you have to have that a 0 first. So the next step is negative 5 times row 2. Negative 5 times row 2 gives us 0, negative 5 plus 60 and 75. Row 3 was just 0, 5, negative 3, and negative 18. Adding that together, I get my new row, which is 0, 0, 57, and 57. All right, so we are going to go ahead and replace row 2 with this and row 3 with this. So now what I am looking at is 1, 0, negative 11, negative 7, and 0, 1, negative 12, negative 15, and my last row is 0, 0, 57, and 57. All right, so this brings up a technique that we haven't used before. I'm going to go ahead and take 1 over 57 and multiply that times row 3, and that allows me to go through and make that a little bit smaller. So now I have 1, 0, negative 11, negative 7, 0, 1, negative 12, negative 15, and finally 0, 0, 1, and 1. And at this point, this gives me this column of 1s right here, and I'm going to go ahead and switch it back into our equation so we can go ahead and get some answers. So remember, this last equation here, this is coming from the fact that this is x, y, z is equal to my piece here. So this piece here gives me that z is equal to 1. Now, the next row, this gives me the fact that I have y minus 12 times z is equal to negative 15. But remember what we just said? We just said that z was equal to 1 here, right? So that gives us the fact that I have y minus 12 is equal to 15, negative 15. I add 12 to both sides, and I get the fact that y is equal to negative 3. So I have z and y already, so now all I need to do is go back to the very beginning in which I had, or actually we can not even go back out at the very beginning. We can go ahead and go back to the first row that we created up here, and that tells me 1x, I skipped the y term because the y is 0, minus 11z is equal to negative 7. And again, remember that z is just equal to 1. So I have x minus 11 is equal to negative 7, or x is just equal, or z is just equal to 4. Make sure, please remember this, to write your solution set as a point. And so our final answer here will go ahead and be the fact that I have x is equal to 4, y is equal to negative 3, and z is equal to 1. Now, if we want to go ahead and check this, which is always a good idea after doing all of this work, let's go back to one of the very original equations and see. So our check for this, our first equation was so one of our original equations was x minus y plus z was equal to 8. So if I go through and check this out, x is 4 minus a negative 3 plus 1. And yes, it does indeed equal the fact that it's 8. 4 plus 3 plus 1. So I am now done with this equation. Just please remember to write your answer as the final answer is the solution set.